The lake looked like frosted glass under a sky the color of ash. Wind braided itself through the pines and came down off the ridge with a taste of iron, the kind that lingered on the tongue and made breath feel like a thin thread. Mara stood on the porch of the old inn with a ring of keys in her palm, the metal warm from being held too tight. Nothing here was quite as she remembered, everything smaller and closer, as if the years had drawn the buildings inward around the absence of the woman who used to fill them. The swing creaked on its chain. The sign, Cedar Harbour House, hung a little crooked. A gull cried once, and the sound broke into the cold like a glass being tapped. She unlocked the door and stepped into a room that smelled of cedar, lemon oil, and thyme. Her grandmother's clock, unmoving, a dried wreath of bay leaves, the front desk with its shallow drawer where notes had waited for summer guests. Back at dusk, water's fine today, coffee on the stove. She set her bag down and stood still long enough for silence to become a thing with a shape. She had come to close the inn, pack what could be sold, fold what could be given away, simple verbs for complicated endings. The radiator rattled. Outside the window, the lighthouse blinked through the thin noon like a pulse. She went back to the porch to bring in the last box and missed the top step. It wasn't a fall so much as a sag in the world, a sudden drop that caught her ankle and twisted. Pain bloomed hot and immediate. She sat on the step and breathed until the edges of the day came back into place. "You okay?" a voice called from the path below. She looked up into wind, and a figure drawing itself out of the grey. A man with a knit cap and a jacket dotted with salt. A tool bag slung over one shoulder. He didn't come closer until she nodded. When he did, his steps were careful on the slick boards, the kind of careful that meant he'd done this dance with ice 1,000 times. "I'm fine," she said automatically. It came out thin. He crouched, not touching her, just angling himself so the wind hit his back instead of her face. "You're new to the winter here," he said, like a fact. His eyes had that washed green color the lake takes when a storm is thinking about becoming itself. "Not new," she said, and then added, "Back, I guess." The word felt both heavier and lighter than she'd expected. "I'm Rowan," he said, and nodded at the lighthouse as if it were a neighbor. "Keeper, mechanic, whatever word you like for a person who coaxes light into doing its job." "Mara." Her ankle ached cleanly. He glanced at it, then at her. "Can you flex it?" She did. The tendons complained, then compromised. "I can make it to a chair," she said. He offered an elbow instead of a hand, a small difference that seemed to matter. She took it, allowing weight to shift and return, testing what she could trust. Inside, he helped her to the old crimson chair by the window and waited until she was settled to unshoulder his bag. "The storm tomorrow will lock things down," he said. "I was on my way to check the shore batteries. When I saw the gate open, I figured someone finally came for the inn." He didn't say to empty it. He didn't say to end it. She heard the possibilities he left unsaid, and it felt like mercy. "Coffee?" she asked, because the question was a way to make the room into more than a memory. He said yes, with a gratefulness that looked less like hunger and more like respect for warm things. The kettle took its time. He looked around the lobby as if he were reading a familiar page, eyes resting a heartbeat on the pair of rain boots by the door, the jar of sea glass on the bookshelf, the portrait of a woman with a braid thick as rope. "She ran this place forever," he said, nodding toward the portrait. 41 years, Mara said. And a summer before that, if you count me getting in the way. She taught half the town to tie a bowline, he said, and to stand up straight when grief walks in. His voice was matter-of-fact, not reverent, as if endurance were a skill you practiced, not a miracle that visited only the lucky. The kettle sighed. The aroma rose, bitter and almond dark. He took the mug with both hands like a winter ritual. "You'll need ice for that ankle," he said. She started to protest and stopped, because it felt nice to let someone else know what to do. He vanished and returned with a bag of frozen blueberries from the inn's old freezer, wrapped in a dish towel the color of rain. "It's not textbook," he said, "but it's cold and it won't leak." "Blueberry medicine," she said. The corner of his mouth did something that wasn't exactly a smile and wasn't not. The afternoon thinned into a pale kind of gold, the way winter gives light generously and then takes it all at once. Rowan stood to go, and she felt the impulse to stop him, not because of anything dramatic, but because him leaving would return the room to a single heartbeat. "If you need help bringing the rest in before the weather," he said, "I'll come back when I finish at the station." It was phrased as a statement more than an offer, as if the decision had already been made in the quiet logic of someone who lives by tides and maintenance schedules. "Thank you," she said. He tipped his cap, and the door closed softly behind him. Alone, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The inn watched her the way empty rooms do, not judging, just patient. She turned the closed sign so it faced in, not out, and laughed, because that felt exactly like where she was, inside the ending, looking at it with both hands free. She made lists in her notebook: linens, ledgers, lamps, letters. Under letters, she wrote, "Read them in the blue chair, not all at once." Under lamps, "Keep the one with the crack that looks like a river." Late afternoon slid into the deep blue hour. Snow began as the softest confetti, invisible until it gathered, then undeniable. The lighthouse blinked. 1, 2, 3, and each pulse stitched a seam through the falling white. She stood by the window with the blueberry medicine melting against her skin and let the scene soak into her. Her body had always learned a place by its light. City light lifted from pavement, island light bounced off water. Here it moved from a lens the size of a barrel and laid itself gently across the roofs. When Rowan returned, his jacket was powdered with snow, and his hair had gone wild under his cap. He must have trotted the last block. He had the warm, surprised look of someone who ran into weather and was properly greeted by it. "Batteries are sulking," he said, dropping his bag beside the umbrella stand. "But they'll hold if the wind behaves." It never does. They brought in boxes together, steady as a metronome. He didn't comment on the objects, didn't ask what each was worth. He treated her grandmother's canning jars, the cracked pitcher, the iron bell, with the same carefulness he gave to the toolbox that had split its hinge. Each thing made it across the threshold like a small rescue. When they were done, he lingered, as if the threshold itself had become an interesting place. "You'll hear the boy tonight," he said. "They tuned it last October. New tone. It's lower, like a cello." "My grandmother used to say the boy kept her from waking to bad dreams," Mara said, and was surprised to hear her voice soften around the edges. As long as it sang, she trusted the world to keep its shape. "It will sing," he said simply. Then, after a beat, "If you need anything, wood, company, someone to argue with the radiator, There's a light on the station door. Follow it. People forget that kneading is as ordinary as tying your boots. She watched him walk back through the snow until the dusk swallowed him and the lighthouse blinked him back for one instant, then let him go. The boy lowed in the first deep blue hour, a patient sound, the vowel long and calming, a gentle tether between here and the invisible. A soft, soothing calm settled into her bones, not the glamour of joy, not even relief, just a tender easing that felt like the embroidery on her grandmother's pillow. Hold fast. She made one last note in her book. Tomorrow, start with the kitchen, not the photographs. And because she had promised herself to try one new thing each day, she stepped out onto the porch and held her phone up to the blue hour. The inn's eaves, the lighthouse pulse, the snow falling slow. "If this place puts a little peaceful hush in your chest too," she murmured, pressing record, though she wasn't certain she would post it. "Like, leave a note so I know you're out there. And, if you'd keep me company while I figure this out, subscribe. I think this is going to be a long, good winter." The storm walked in overnight like a careful giant. It wasn't loud, only thorough. Morning rose as a milky wash, edges erased, the world remade in the vocabulary of white. Mara woke to the sound of the buoy and the patient clink of heat in pipes. Her ankle had the stiff, remembered ache of body and weather negotiating. She made tea. Steam curled into the cold, writing brief cursive that melted above the cup. Work made the first hour less abstract. She sorted linens into piles and let her hands learn their old language, cotton of ordinary summers, the heavy damask of weddings, the absurdly soft wool throw her grandmother insisted on keeping for only the hottest afternoons, to remind our bodies that comfort doesn't always make sense. She laughed at the memory, and the room warmed by a degree that had nothing to do with radiators. Near noon, the door opened without ceremony, and Rowan came in with 2 paper bags smelling like cinnamon and yeast. "The bakery owed the station a favour," he said, "by which I mean I fixed their door in October when it forgot how to be a door. I can't eat all this alone." They ate at the little round table by the window, cinnamon knots and coffee, the snow beyond the glass as steady as a mantra. He didn't fill silence with facts, and that was its own kind of kindness. She learned in the quiet anyway. The thin scar on his thumb that meant a careless blade and an old lesson. The way his shoulders lowered a measure when the boy sounded. The way he distributed attention evenly. To storm, to pastry, to her. It felt gentle, and she didn't realize how starved she'd been for gentle until she felt herself setting down the old habit of checking every doorway for what could go wrong. "Your grandmother taught me to dance in that space," he said, nodding to the living room where the rug had been rolled away and sea glass pooled in the window like a bowl of small moons. "I was 12. The town tried to hide in the gym with peanut butter sandwiches and fear. She dragged us here and taught us a waltz to the radio static and told us to look where we were going, not where we were afraid to slip." Mara could see it. The chair legs, the bare boards, the stubborn joy. Her throat crowded. "After my mother left," she said, surprised at herself because she hadn't meant to open any doors yet, "Gran said I had to find things that stayed. She said they were never people." Then she gave me a cup of tea and sat beside me until we both fell asleep. That staying wasn't a thing either, just an act. He didn't flinch. "She told me to learn a trade that made other people's lives steadier." I didn't argue. I like being useful, and I like the feeling of making lighthouse hours into something that warms a boat halfway to the horizon. The window whitened. The boy sang. The room felt like a calm pocket stitched into a wider storm. She found a quiet she could trust there, soft and peaceful, and her chest loosened. "I fix broken audio for a living," she said. "Old tapes, family voices, mixtapes teenagers thought would last forever. I stitch them back together and send the voices home. I thought I was helping other people fix memory. I think maybe I liked the power of saying what stayed and what didn't." "You tell the sound it can keep going," he said. "That's a sacred kind of ordinary. My grandmother used to say work was love disguised as repetition. Stir until smooth, sand until the wood forgives the nail. Try again." Mara smiled into her cup. "I came here to close her life. I didn't plan for the sound of it to keep going." "Maybe it doesn't close," he said. "Maybe it changes verbs." The afternoon turned a deeper grey. He helped her move the piano a little, so the radiator heat wouldn't dry the wood too fast. They found a box of letters behind the instrument, tied with a ribbon the colour of dusk. That discovery had the hush of church. They didn't open them right away. Instead, they set the box on the counter and let it wait, a gentle promise in paper. When her ankle complained, he brought the blueberry medicine out again, and they laughed like children at the purple stain it left on the towel. "Tell me a bad memory that went somewhere softer," he said later, when the storm began to purr instead of chew. He didn't ask it like a therapist or a confessor. It was an invitation to place something heavy down between them where they both could see it, make it lighter by recognition. She thought of a hospital room with late light and her mother's nose tilted toward a window as if it could absolve, of the last voicemail she hadn't answered, of an airport where grief had felt like a secret she wasn't old enough to understand. "I used to replay the voicemail," she said, "over and over, looking for the word that would save us. The last time I listened, I heard rain in the background. For years, I didn't know why that was the part that made me ache. Now, I think it's because rain is this equal thing. It falls on everything. It doesn't decide what to forgive. It just keeps the world from cracking." "That's a tender way to hear it," he said. "Sometimes I listen to old storm logs. You can hear the pencil pressing too hard when the keeper was scared. The sea doesn't know we're scared. We make the marks to show we were here anyway." Outside, the lighthouse kept breathing. He told her about the mechanical heart of it, the Fresnel lens like a cathedral of glass, the tiny bulb guarded by an architecture of prisms. She told him about salvage jobs where a song came back in pieces and she stitched it until the harmony remembered its home. They spoke the way people do when they find the seam between their lives and recognize it from far away. Nothing grand, just attention meeting attention until it felt like warmth. As evening drew in, the wind shifted. The windows hummed. Lights in town flickered, shrugged, steadied. A small red line on the battery panel in the lighthouse brain must have dipped. Rowan stood like a bird scenting weather, and then sat again. "It'll hold," he said, and if reassurance had texture, his had the rough, comforting knit of a well-worn sweater. She opened a letter from the box. "Dear M," it began, which could have been to her or from the sea itself. The handwriting was looping, the ink faded to a color that looked like the inside of shells. Her grandmother had written it to a girl who came every summer alone, the one who arrived with a red duffel and a book bigger than her face. "You have a brave way of listening," it said. "You do not snatch the story. You hold the basket while other people place their pieces in it. The world needs that." Mara folded the letter back into itself and let a breath out through her nose. "My grandmother planned for me," she said. "Even when I planned around her, she'd like that the lightkeeper eats cinnamon knots at our table. She'd like that you let yourself stay long enough to notice," he said. They made soup from the inn's cannery, herbs from a jar labelled "Summer" in small, bossy letters. The steam made the windows part for a moment, then blur again. Rowan washed dishes with sleeves rolled and a focus that made suds look like work and grace at once. Later they sat with their backs to the same couch and read without speaking, the kind of quiet that happens when two people are alone together and find the absence of talk not empty, but layered, gentle, soft. The room held. When night came all the way, the boy settled into its slow metronome. The lighthouse sent its patient thirds into the dark. She felt her own weather ease. Healing didn't announce itself with trumpets. It happened like snow on spruce, tiny rehearsals of softness until everything was covered. She looked over and found Rowan asleep in the chair with his book on his chest, his breath a steady tide. She tucked a blanket over him and did not feel lonely, not like she had expected to. The power blinked once, then steadied. Somewhere in town, a dog barked twice and started dreaming. Mara stood in the doorway between lobby and kitchen and placed her palm on the frame like a person greeting the door itself. "Thank you," she thought, "for staying, for letting me stay." The inn didn't answer, but the radiator sang the smallest metal hymn, and that was enough. In the morning, the storm had passed, and the world was remade with simple edges. The light came in like something apologizing for being away. Rowan scrubbed a hand over his face and blinked at the room as if he were remembering which life this was. "The station calls," he said, and she nodded. He pulled on his coat and paused at the door. "There's a dance at the hall next week," he said. "The old kind. Fiddle, pie, children running with socks sliding. You could come. You should." He said it the way one says you should see the winter stars or you should taste strawberries in July, because it would be good to let your body be that happy. She said yes before doubt could rehearse its lines. He went back into the bright cold, and she looked at the inn as if it had fiddles tucked under the stairs. The week between was a string of small repairs made and things learned. She learned the exact sound of fresh snow sliding off the cedar roof and hitting the porch rail. She learned which radiator complained in a pitch that suggested apology and which needed an Allen key and a firm word. She learned Rowan's schedule by light instead of clock, where the blink looked at 3 in the afternoon, where it brushed the inn at 5, what it did to his face when he came up the walk with cold on his ears, how it made everything look like a decision kindly made. At the dance, the hall smelled like cinnamon and wool. People greeted her with the soft curiosity small towns have when they aren't sure if you're returning, passing through, or becoming the person who stays. Rowan's hand on her back felt like a sentence ending with certainty. The fiddle sprang up. Real waltz, the sort of tune that stitches strangers into a pattern. They moved awkwardly at first, then less so, then not at all. The body has a good memory when you let it. Halfway through a set, the lights dimmed, then flickered. A hush fell. Someone made a joke about kissing under the emergency bulb, laughter easing the held breath of a room that had lived with winter longer than anyone in it. Rowan listened the way he listened to the boy. "Transformer," he said softly, not for panic, just for the record. He touched her wrist. "I'll go," he said. "You'll be warm here." "I'll come," she answered, surprising herself. He didn't argue. They grabbed coats and stepped into the bright cold together, breath blooming like small, certain ghosts. The road to the station glowed, snow reflecting town light back into itself, the lighthouse marking time. The wind had risen again and spoke in a voice that moved between fences. At the base of the hill, they met Elias from the bakery, cheeks pink, toolbox banging against his knee. "Thought you could use an extra pair of hands," he said, and the kindness of it tightened something in Mara's chest and loosened it immediately after. The station was a squat building with a history in its walls and a humming present across its panels. Inside, the red line on the board had dipped further than Rowan liked. He moved with a steadiness that made worry feel unnecessary. "I'll hold the grid while you reset the feeder," he said to Elias, and they flowed into readiness as if they had rehearsed it every Saturday. The town was alive. Mara stood by the window and watched the harbour, the light, the sky that looked both close and infinite. A brief darkness fell, not an absence, a pause, like a breath taken before the body decides to sing. Then the light returned stronger, and she felt it in her ribs. Something eased. The hall would glow again. A grandmother would keep reading the story out loud. A teenager would have enough illumination to decide whether to forgive herself. Ordinary resurrections. Rowan looked at her across the hum of machinery and smiled outright this time, not a half version. "We're good," he said, the simplest benediction. They walked back to the hall with the wind at their backs, their footprints making a sentence the snow translated beautifully. Music spilled out the door like heat. Inside, someone handed her a slice of pie and said, "You're Ida's girl," and her name stitched itself to the room in a way that felt both new and decades old. She and Rowan danced a slow one, the kind where you count not with numbers, but with how the floorboards answer your steps. She laid her cheek briefly against his shoulder and let the healing in her chest take up a little more space. It felt gentle, soft, soothing. It felt like a tender promise that the peaceful kind of life might be brave enough to carry the rest. Later, when they stood on the inn's porch, the cold bright and the stars so sharp they looked like they could cut, Mara found herself afraid of only one thing, that the smallness of her joys would be mistaken for weakness by a world that preferred noise. Rowan heard that fear the way he seemed to hear most things she didn't say. "The light doesn't apologize for being constant," he told her, nodding toward the headland. "It doesn't shout. It doesn't explain. It just keeps time, and boats trust it." He went home to sleep. She stood in the doorway and looked at the inn as if it had just told her a true thing she'd needed for years. Inside, the red scarf her grandmother wore to weddings hung on the coat tree. She touched it and didn't cry. The boy spoke once, and the sound spread through her like a hand smoothing cloth. Winter tightened and then slowly, stubbornly began to think about spring. The ice retreated from eaves like an apology. Children appeared with chalk in their pockets. Birds returned in foolish numbers. Mara stayed, not just in the way of bodies occupying rooms, but in the way of routine and intention, and the name the postman wrote on the slate when he left a parcel: Mara, Cedar Harbor House. She repaired windows, polished wood until it reflected the world without lying about it, chose which quilts went into the cedar chest and which stayed on beds for summer shoulders. A stray dog adopted the porch, and then, gradually, them. They named him Compass because he never quite pointed in the direction you expected, but somehow always found something worth going toward. Rowan started leaving his cap on the peg by the door, as if it had belonged there for years. He learned where she kept the tea and stopped asking which mug was his. He reached for the chipped one with the thunderhead on the side and warmed his hands around it the way some people warm them around new promises. It wasn't dramatic. Healing almost never is. It was her ankle forgetting to ache, her sleep forgetting to nurse the old worry, his shoulders remembering to drop, the boy settling into background music instead of alarm, the way they reached for the same jar of honey without bumping hands because their bodies had learned each other's maps. Then the storm came, the late one that announces itself with a clear day like a liar. The town buzzed on the radio with the small, efficient panic of experience. Boats were pulled farther up the beach. Windows were taped. The hall was opened for anyone who didn't trust their own roofs. Rowan checked the station twice, then once more. "It will be ugly," he said, not to scare her, just to include her in reality. Mara filled thermoses and the old samovar Ida had saved for weddings. She made a sign in block letters and set it on the porch. "Hot drinks. Come in." The dog lay across the threshold and wagged at everyone like the whole event was a party they had arranged to surprise him. Night arrived with a white roar. The air was made of knives and noise. The lighthouse flung its pulse into a world that looked like it had no edges. The inn filled with neighbors, the kind of crowd that is careful with furniture and generous with stories. Someone started a tune on a harmonica because the electricity stepped out without warning. The room glowed by lamp and candle, an amber pocket in a storm that turned the rest of the town into a rumor. The boy sang, and then didn't, and the silence it left felt like a pulled thread. Rowan stood by the window and listened. "The mooring line," he said. "It snapped." He met Mara's eyes, and something steady passed between them. "I need to go." "I'm coming," she said, because the memory of the transformer night had taught her what he looked like when he needed a second pair of hands. "Stay," someone said from the couch. "It's a fool's errand." Mara pulled on her boots. The dog wagged and considered this a vote. "We'll take the headland path," Rowan said. "Less wind." They moved into noise and white, and the strange, intimate fear of not being able to see more than an arm's length. The world was reduced to breath and voice, and the rope between them Rowan had looped loosely around their waists. He called out the shape of the land: up, now left, flat, careful, ice. She trusted completely, not because she didn't have her own good legs, but because his knowledge of this ground had been written by years, and she was allowed to borrow it for this hour. The boy had swung free, and the line had snarled itself around a rock the way a frightened animal will crowd a corner. Rowan moved with the unshowy competence she had learned to love. No drama, no disgust at difficulty, only method. She braced where he said, held the line where he pointed, hauled in foot by foot, while ice needled her cheeks. When the rope burned against her palm, he wrapped his own gloved hand over hers without asking, and together they brought the heavy bell home. A gust hit them like a body. She staggered. He kept both of them upright with a word that lifted like a beam. "Steady." They lashed the boy, checked the knot twice. The world tried to make them small. They refused. When the boy sang again, the note rattled the storm's teeth and made the day under it reel. They stood for 1 second in the noise and looked at each other. And in that second the shape of her life decided itself without fanfare. She reached, he was already reaching, and their hands met, not trembling. They went back to the inn with their rope tied and their ears ringing. Inside, the room roared with warmth and the old thick pleasure of gratitude. Someone cried openly and then laughed because the crying felt so good. Rowan shook snow from his hair and steam rose like a stupid miracle. Mara took his face in both hands without checking whether anyone watched and said thank you in a way that meant a collection of things. For the light, for the rope, for the steadiness you let me lean on, for the way you did not try to save me from my own strength and did not leave me alone to prove it. The storm blew itself into raggedness by morning. The town washed its face in cold sun. The lighthouse blinked with that tolerant expression machines get when they have survived exactly as designed. Mara took the sign from the porch and put it in the closet labeled summer because it felt like a future thing now. Rowan came up the walk slowly, as if letting the day arrive around him. He stood on the step and looked at her the way one looks at a shoreline after a hard, beautiful voyage. "Stay," he said. Then, because he knew her and her grandmother and the grammar of the inn, he added, "Not for me, for you, for the way your body stands when the boy sings and the light goes by, for the work your hands do when there's a hinge and a song and a letter that needs a gentle person." She exhaled something she'd held for years. "I am," she said. "I am staying." The words landed in her chest like gulls deciding to fold their wings and rest. Quietly, not with trumpets, healing came to stand beside love, and didn't argue about who had the better name. They walked up to the ridge that afternoon. The snow gave under their boots with a sound like bread. The town lay in its shallow bowl, roofs mended by sun. The inn looked like a thing that knew what it was for. The lighthouse kept time. She took his hand and didn't let go. He squeezed once, more of a promise than a performance. That evening they opened Ida's letters and read them aloud in turns, not because they needed guidance, but because it felt right to let an old voice chaperone the first calm night. The dog snored. The clock Ida had refused to replace ticked again. Rowan had fixed it without announcing the fix, and for the first time in a long while the sound didn't make Mara count what she could lose. It made her count what she had. They danced once in the small space between counter and couch. No music beyond breath, and the small sounds houses make when they approve of their people. When they stopped, he rested his forehead against hers, and neither of them made a vow they couldn't keep. They made a small local one they could, to put the kettle on before panic, to hold the rope steady in weather, to keep the boy singing when fear thinks it's the only sound. Later, she set the phone on the window ledge and filmed the lighthouse pulse once, twice, 3 times, the 2 mugs of tea steaming in the corner of the frame, the soft outline of a dog who had adopted them without paperwork. If this story found you in a cold place and warmed a finger, a wrist, a small stubborn corner of your day, she said, voice low so it wouldn't wake anything sleeping, like, leave a line so we can see the light traveling, And if you want to keep walking this shore with us, subscribe. We'll be here, with a lamp in the window and something simple on the stove." The boy answered like a friend. Outside, the lake shifted under the stars and settled. Inside, two people did the same, and if love arrived like winter sun, quiet and undeniable, neither of them apologized for its softness. They let it be strong the way gentle things are strong, without noise, without explanation, with a steadiness that turned an inn, a station, a life into a place someone could come home to.